that I'm presenting from Australia, and in Australia it is currently 5:30 a.m. So I am a little bit tired, but that's okay. I've done this presentation before, so I know what I'm talking about. So today I want to talk about mobile accessibility. I want to start with some mobile accessibility fails that you might or might not be aware of, just to sort of see, show you what we've been seeing lately. The first is this Jamie Oliver's recipe app, and when you first open the app, basically what happens is it throws you into the video player that's in your device and plays a video which doesn't have any captions or audio descriptions, and then at the at the end of that, it basically, sorry, I just saw 5:30 and diving in. Yep, that's me. I'm going to actually make the chat a little bit smaller so it doesn't distract me. So basically, so this is a problem with pause, stop, hide. It's a real accessibility problem. Here we have Amazon, and what's the first thing that you do when you go to Amazon is you search. The thing that you're looking for is probably not on the homepage unless you like buying multiple versions of things. And of course the search here, the what are you looking for, is grey text on a white background, and doesn't meet color contrast requirements. Now, I actually sat next to somebody at a conference where they were the UX product lead for the homepage, and I can't tell you who it was, but it's one of these people, Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, and basically I said, are you aware? And they're like, oh yeah, we fixed that 2 weeks ago, so now it meets color contrast requirements, and our profit increased by 13%, and that's a huge increase. If you think about the tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars a company like that might be spending on search engine optimization, then like 13% just for making sure your color contrast of your field labels are visible, really big improvement. So this here, I used to, before COVID, do a whole lot of travel. Seem to be speaking at the same number of conferences, but traveling a lot less. I'm here, I don't know if you can see my background, but I'm here in sunny Queensland in a place called the Sunshine Coast. It's as beautiful as it sounds. And so when I traveled, I'd often, catch up on TV series and, log into Netflix. And every now and again, I would get this error that said error, and then cancel. There's no explanation of what the problem is. Do I not have access to that because I'm in a different location? Do I not have internet access? Is my password wrong? That kind of stuff. So this violates 3.3.1 error identification and 3.3.3 error suggestion. And this is the ABC app, and on the left is the very smallest amount of text, and on the right is the very largest amount of text, because it's got a font resizer within its app, and the very largest amount of text isn't 200% of the normal text. It's only a couple of points larger, and so this fails 1.4.4 resize text. But the biggest problem is if you scroll to the top of the screen, you actually find that whether you selected small text or large text, the actual article name, the caption, the author, etc., are all the same size, whether you've chosen small or large text. So that's a real problem. And this here fails 3.2.3 consistent navigation. Before we had Trello, we used Asana, and I would only ever work off my tasks or inbox. If something wasn't in my tasks or inbox, then I didn't do it. But the mobile app didn't actually have my tasks or inbox. So, basically it was useless to me. So, we decided to, and I'll talk about who we is, develop a mobile methodology for a number of reasons. Even though there was some accessibility errors that you can tie back to WCAG 2, we found that actually there are a whole lot more that weren't covered in WCAG 2. So what happened is 2017 in October, I was at the second ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium, which is in DC every year. It's virtual this year. If you're an accessibility tester, definitely recommend it. And every year they have this thing called a town hall where we all get together, the people in the accessibility testing industry and ask and talk about what it is we think that the industry needs. And what came out of that is that all the big accessibility companies, you know, DQ, Level Access, Paciello Group, us, we all had our own mobile accessibility testing guidelines, and there wasn't really consistency across all of them. So we decided to form a committee and we amalgamated all the guidelines. And the reason why all we did was amalgamate the guidelines is because we knew WCAG 2.1 was being released in June in 2018, and we really hoped that the WCAG 2.1 would actually address these problems and we wouldn't need the methodology any longer. So why doesn't WCAG 2 actually address these things? Well, WCAG 2 does apply to mobile. You know, if you've got a button on a mobile app, a native app, it needs to have alternative text. If you've got an image in a mobile site, it needs to have an alt attribute, etc. But not all aspects of mobile accessibility are covered by WCAG 2. For example, even though WCAG 2 requires sites to be accessible to the keyboard, it doesn't require that it's accessible to the touchscreen user. So there are a few things like that that we're missing. So WCAG 2.1 builds on, you know, some of the things that were missing. Amongst them, mobile, there was some vision impairment and cognitive disability things that were added as well, and it added things like pointer gestures and sensors and information about small screen devices, but it really didn't cover everything that you really needed for mobile accessibility. And probably the best example, if someone says why are you using this methodology and not WCAG 2.1, is the touch target size requirement. So we're all very aware that a really small touch target size is very inaccessible and unusable to a lot of people, especially if you can't pinch the screen larger, in which you can't do in a lot of apps. However, and there is a requirement for touch target size in 2.1, however, it's relegated to AAA, and so that's the highest level and not actually what's required by government. Government requires a lower level of standards compliance at level AA or 2A. So that's why we decided that we would continue developing the methodology, and I was co-chair of the next two committees. One was for mobile site and one was for native app, and we developed this methodology. We added a whole lot of things that we thought were missing, and we released them in 2019, and they're up on our website, and I'll show you later on, and they're available under Creative Commons, so you can grab them and use them, and they're quite detailed. So a lot of what I'm talking about today, all of what I'm talking about today, is in the documentation. So how is mobile different? Mobile have very specific accessibility features. So if you're talking about a desktop, what you know, anyone can build a screen reader, and we've seen that with things like NVDA. The developer of NVDA, sorry, excuse me. The developer of NVDA thought that JAWS and IBM Homepage Reader, back when it was around, weren't sufficient, and so he built his own screen reader. You really can't do that on mobile. There are inbuilt accessibility features and other mobile features, and that's it. So you've got native screen readers such as TalkBack on Android, Narrator on Windows for anyone who still has a Windows phone, VoiceOver on iOS. There's volume control, a vibrational keyboard, visual, auditory and vibrational notifications, text-to-speech, speech recognition, zoom, grayscale, etc. There's other things like font size, touch and hold delay, screen rotation, high contrast, assistive touch, mono audio, but there's probably about 45 different things in each operating system, and so that's a lot of things to test. If you test just Android once and iOS once, that's 90 different features that you need to test on a multitude of pages. So we do actually order them in terms of importance. The other thing that I want to mention about 2.1 is page variation. So this applies to mobile sites only, not native apps. But basically what we found is that low vision users who use the zoom function inherent in the browser on desktop are often restricted to the mobile view of the site on their desktop because zooming in triggers the mobile breakpoints. As part of WCAG 2, zooming to 200% should be included as in regular testing, and in 2.1 it needs to be 400%. And because they're triggering these mobile breakpoints and seeing the mobile version of the site, often if you don't have the same amount of content on your mobile version as you do on your desktop version, these people can't access all the content. So therefore it's really important that you have all the same content and functionality on all versions or page variations of your site. And it can be hidden under an expandable link or something like that, but it needs to be there. As an example, this happened on YouTube, but it has been fixed. Basically, at 100% screen size, the upload and notification buttons were visible, but not at 200% screen size. And the reason why is because it was assumed that triggered a mobile breakpoint, and they assumed that you were looking at the site on a mobile device, and if you wanted to upload videos, you'd use the YouTube app. So this is at the 100%, as you can see, upload and notifications, and this is at the 200%, they're gone. As I said, that is fixed. The other thing that 2.1 really emphasized is the term accessibility supported. And really what this means, it's incredibly complicated, but what it means is that you must use assistive technologies that are inherent in the devices when you're testing specifically native apps. You should definitely do it for mobile sites as well, but specifically native apps as well. So that's something that you should really think about, and we have a section on that. Now, I'll get a little bit into the methodology now, but I just want to say that the methodology only includes those things that you need to add to WCAG 2. So we don't have things like your images need alt attributes, your headings need to be coded, etc., because that's already in WCAG 2, but it does include those new errors in 2.1. The one thing that I'd really like to emphasize is that you must test with real devices, and if it's location based, in actual locations. Back 6 years ago when I started traveling to the States, I'd get to LAX airport after a 15-hour flight and from Melbourne, and we'd often sit on the tarmac for a couple of hours waiting for a gate to be available. But you could access the LAX Wi-Fi from the tarmac, and this is what I would get. Is this, were you disconnected? Click here to reconnect, when I was already connected. And then it says, this page will redirect, so content doesn't really make sense to have here. And all of a sudden, I don't feel like I want to give you my credit card details. So how does this happen? This happens because people didn't test with actual devices or in actual locations. In terms of the methodology, there are 5 testing methods for for mobile sites and 2 for native app. So the 4 main testing methods in mobile site testing is testing with devices, which is testing on mobile and tablet devices, testing with devices with assistive technologies, such as mobile and tablet devices with assistive technologies or mobile features, a responsive window, so a responsively sized window on desktop and on desktop. On native app, for native app testing, there's only 2, devices and devices with assistive technologies. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about site types. This is just for the mobile site only. There are 3 types of mobile sites. There are desktop websites that have only one display, whether viewed on desktop or mobile or tablet. Then there's m.dot sites that have a particular display for mobile and tablet sites. The m.dot site must be tested against WCAG 2 and on the desktop as well, and the www version must be tested against WCAG 2 and on the mobile. And then there are responsive sites that change depending on the screen size or other feature determined by the developer. So this is an example of a desktop site. This is the Australian National Botanic Gardens. And when you make the screen smaller by dragging the scroll bar on the right, you see it just cuts off content. And so it doesn't resize, it doesn't change in any way. That's a desktop site. The way to identify an m.dot site, you must do these three things. Ask the client, but don't assume that just because the client says we don't have an m.dot site that they don't, because I did some training for Stanford last year with the IT people, and we found a rogue m.dot site that no one knew who owned. And then the other thing to do is on desktop, change the www to m, and also compare the site, as you said, on desktop to the site on a mobile device. So this is the Sephora desktop site. As you can see, it's a kind of brown background with 4 options. You've got navigation along the top. If I replace www with m, what I see is something that's much more blue. There's only one major image. Search goes across the entire screen. You've got a hamburger menu, etc. If I resize the windows, you can see the difference between the www site and the m.dot site. The www site looks like a desktop site where it gets cut off, whereas the m.dot site resizes really nicely. Then lastly, there are responsive websites. Most of the time, the sites that you're looking at will be responsive. If it's responsive, it's definitely not a desktop site, but it is possible that there's an m.dot site as well. The site's responsive if the layout changes as you change the browser size, the browser window size. So basically, to test this, open the website in the browser, ensure the window is not maximized, select the right-hand edge and drag it to the center of the screen. So this is an example of a responsive website, which is the Accessibility Oz website. On desktop, you've got normal navigation along the top. You've got services, 6 icons in one row. You make the screen smaller by dragging it across. The navigation changes to a hamburger menu. The icons reflow. So you also need to think about variations of a page, and this is mobile site only as well. It's important that each variation of the page is tested and that all functionality is available on all variations of the page. And basically, the first thing you need to do is identify variations of a page. Now, why would you provide variations of a page? The first is to highlight particular content on mobile, such as phone details, or hide particular content on mobile, such as image gallery, or hide functionality that doesn't work. However, you must not do this. The triggers for variations of a page are things like the device, the operating system, the browser, or the screen size. Under this methodology, the only valid trigger for a variation of a page is screen size. So this here is a variation in content where the Accessibility Oz navigation basically is just text horizontally along the page. You make it smaller, it turns into a hamburger menu. These two things are different pieces of code and so need to be tested appropriately. Whereas this here is a variation in presentation. And so you have home, committee, register, program on desktop, and on the mobile, instead of being horizontal, they're listed vertically, and that's just a variation in the CSS, not the code. So if you're aware of this kind of stuff because you've been developing the site, that can help with the testing. And then as I said, every variation needs to be tested, and that's specifically outlined in WCAG 2.1. Then with native apps, we said, okay, what do we need to determine to, sort of highlight our testing? So the first thing that you need to do is define application functionality. Mobile native apps are much more streamlined than websites. So for example, a ING website is going to be about how to apply for a home loan or open an account or, contact someone, etc., or get a new card. Whereas the ING mobile app is specifically for banking and covering, like moving money between your accounts and things like that. So the first thing you need to do is define what the functionality of that app is. And then you need to look at the common elements that need testing, such as navigation, menus, header, footer, landing pages, emergency alert pages, login pages, settings, account and profile, contact us, real-time updates such as eBay and Uber, privacy policy terms and conditions, interaction and transactional systems such as selecting products, adding to cart, payment, live chat, help, widgets such as calendars and date pickers, third-party integrations such as geolocational maps and chat, and high traffic areas. So ask the question, how would the experience be impacted if the functionality failed, the content couldn't be reached, or the experience caused a barrier to the user? And although absolutely everything needs to be accessible, that's going to help you in terms of prioritizing your testing. So let's talk about the actual methodology itself. The mobile site methodology and the native app methodology have 5 steps, and they are the same steps with the exception of step 2, which differs. So mobile site and native app, step 1 is identify devices. For the mobile site testing methodology, step 2 is identify site type and variations. Step 3 is test critical issues. Step 4 is test mobile specific issues. And step 5 is test mobile assistive technology and feature support. And for native apps, step 2 is define application functionality. So let's talk about identifying devices. The recommended devices and browser combinations are iPhone Safari, iPad Safari, and Android phone Chrome. The other devices to consider is an Android tablet, for example, Samsung Tab A, or alternative devices such as a Kindle device, if that's what your product is aimed at. You really need to look at your Google stats though. That will be a very good indication of what it is that you should be looking at in terms of testing. We recommend testing on the latest version of iOS and the latest 2 versions of Android. And where a site is directly aimed at a person with a particular kind of disability, say a switch user, then consider using assistive devices and other technologies that are used by those potential users. I just want to emphasize again that you need to meet WCAG 2 as well as this methodology. And the next step is identify site type and variations of the page in the mobile site. So is the site desktop responsive and m.dot? If the site is responsive, identify each variation of the page. For native apps, define application functionality, and this is the common elements that I mentioned before. And then we get into the critical issues. Now, this is really interesting. We found that there are a whole lot more what we call traps in mobile sites and native apps than on desktop. A trap is where a user is trapped within a component and can't escape without closing the browser or the app. An example of this is a keyboard trap, where you maybe say tab into a video player and you can't tab out of it, you're trapped within the video player. And so keyboard traps are talked about in WCAG 2, but that's the only trap that is actually referenced in WCAG 2. But we find there's a lot more traps in mobile sites and native apps. The first one I'm going to talk about is the exit trap, and the requirement is ensure there is always an accessible actionable item, e.g. a close button that meets color contrast requirements and has an accessible name that closes any feature that overlays the current page, such as a full page ad. This applies to all users, and its methodology is mobile site and native app. This is an example here where the ad overlays the entire page and there's no way to actually get back to the page underneath it. This is another example where this is a San Francisco Chronicle, gives you a pop-up ad about the fall sale. There is a very small close button, but it doesn't meet touch target size requirements, and it doesn't meet color contrast requirements either. Then we have what we call a swipe or scroll trap. Ensure you do not override standard mobile touch functions, swiping, scrolling, etc. on the majority of the page. This applies to touch users, and the methodology is mobile site and native app. This is an example here where when you scroll to the bottom of the screen, all of a sudden you can't scroll back up. The only way to go back up is to activate this little arrow at the bottom, which is, doesn't meet color contrast requirements. This is another example, whereas unless you hit the very small white areas around the map, if you swipe, you just scroll the map, you don't scroll the page. So we often see, use 2 fingers to scroll the map and 1 finger scrolls the page. That's a really good way to get around that. Then we have text-to-speech traps. If the app has an ability to provide content via text-to-speech, the screen reader user must be able to pause or stop the app speaking in a simple manner, e.g. by performing a swipe on a screen. This applies to screen reader users, and its methodology is native app. And so this is an example here. This is Pocket, and what you can do is you can play the article that you've chosen, but once activated, the screen reader users can't stop the text-to-speech because they need to navigate to the pause button, which they can't do because the audio reads over their screen reader. Then we have a headset trap. Headset users must always be able to pause media, audio or video content by using the pause play control on the headset. This applies to screen reader users and headset users, and its methodology is native app. This is an example here where you have a little pop-up. You can mute the video pop-up if you want to by hitting this touch, hitting the mute button. However, hitting the pause on the headset hardware just pauses the screen reader. It doesn't pause the actual video that's playing. And lastly, we have a layer trap. The user should not be trapped on a non-visible layer. This applies to all users, but mostly encountered by screen reader users. And its methodology is mobile site and native app. And so this is an example here where you've got a website, you activate the hamburger menu, and when you do that, the screen reader user actually is trapped on the underlying layer, can't access the original layer, can't access the menu content at all. Then we have test mobile specific issues, and this is where most of the testing is included. We have different groupings. The first section is alternatives. So one of the requirements is alternatives are provided for non-web functionality that is mandatory. For example, recording a specific gesture by the camera before functionality appears. So this is an example where we argued a bit about whether we found this passed or failed the requirement. Basically, you have to copy this gesture, which is take a photo of making a peace sign, and there's an option here that says need another way, and if you activate that, then it gives you a form that says verification query, type your message. So I thought that wasn't really sufficient as an alternative, because it wasn't clear, you know, how you were going to go, you know, how you were going to create the equivalent to that, but at least it does provide an alternative. Alternatives are provided for geolocation functionality that is mandatory, for example, requiring a specific geolocation before functionality appears, unless the geolocation is essential for legal reasons, or doing so would invalidate the activity. This applies to geolocation via GPS, user statement, IP address, or other methods. This here is an example. I was overseas and I was logging into IKEA, and I didn't want to share my location because I didn't want them to say, oh, you want to be in the US, when I actually wanted to look at stuff in Australia. So I blocked the location and I got this error. Location service is not enabled for this app. Please go to settings and enable it. Limited functionality of app. And it's not clear why it needs to know exactly where I'm located. This is an example of a pass. This is the Lyft app, which is very similar to Uber. For those who know Uber and not Lyft. And with Lyft, you can be located in one place and choose to be picked up somewhere else. So it doesn't force the pickup to be your exact location. So that's the pass. Another requirement is changes of state of non-standard controls, e.g. hamburger menu star ratings are clearly indicated. So here you've got a hamburger menu for United. When it's closed, it looks like a hamburger menu. When it's open, it looks like a back arrow. And there's two requirements to this. Visually, it needs to look different, and also the alternative text needs to be different. So the hamburger menu should have an alternative text of open menu, and that back arrow should have an alternative text of close menu. You really don't want them both to have an alternative text of menu. And the next group is display. Size of touch targets is at least 44 by 44 CSS pixels, approximately 7 to 10 millimeters. For more information, see 2.1 success criterion, 2.5.5 target size. However, it differs from 2.5.5 as that is a AAA requirement. And so if we do have things that are similar to 2.1, we always have them in the methodology listed like that. This is an example here where the only way to close the little pop-up that installs Airbnb is by hitting a very small close sign in the top left-hand corner. As you can see, this is similar to the exit trap, but the difference between this one and the exit trap is that this doesn't overlay the entire page. You can still do things, but you can't go somewhere or you can't close something. This is an example that passes. This is Outlook. The to, the CC, BCC, subject, they all have adequate target sizes, as do the options at the bottom here, the take photo, attach, etc. Actionable items have sufficient inactive space between them. Inactive space of at least 10 pixels should be provided around active elements. This is probably the best example I have, which is where the edit and the mark complete are very close to each other, and you don't want opposite actions that close to each other. It's very easy to hit mark complete when you need to hit edit, and once you hit something as mark complete, that's it, it's gone. So it doesn't meet other WCAG requirements, so there's no way to get it back. So this is a real problem. The next category is actionable items. Native UI controls, objects, alerts, and elements have been used. Basically, this is what you want to avoid, where someone's created a kind of weird new custom widget and the mobile device sees it as a text field when it has a kind of drop down, and so you activate the on-screen keyboard. This really needs to be a select box. You can style it any way that you like. You just use a select box. You should always use the standard native UI, and although this seems contradictory to the consistency requirement, use the native UI for iOS and the native UI for Android. Even though that means the displays will be inconsistent, you want to use the native UIs. That's much more important. Actionable items, when direct input via the keyboard is not required, provide options for the user to achieve the same result. I use drop downs, radio buttons, checkboxes. Using the keyboard on a mobile device is quite difficult, so you want to reduce the amount that people need to use the keyboard. This here is an example of a fail where the country region is the United States, but you still need to type in the state. Now there's a discrete number of states in the United States, and so this should just be a select box. And so you don't want people to type it in because they're more likely to make a mistake, etc., etc. This is an example of a pass where you start typing in an address and it drops down with suggestions, so you can just select the suggestion as opposed to typing in the address properly. Then we have functionality that can be operated by device motion or user motion, can also be operated by user interface components, and responding to the motion can be disabled to prevent accidental actuation, except for certain situations. And this is similar to 2.1 success criterion, 2.5.4 motion actuation. This is an example of motion actuation where if you shake the device like this, if you're in like an instant message app or something like that, you get a pop-up that says undo typing. It can be turned off in settings, but there's no alternative to that. Then this is a fail as well, because basically you shake when you're on Android, Facebook, and it can't be turned off unless you actually activate the shaking, but you can report a problem a different way. And infinite scrolling has not been used, so you really can't use infinite scrolling. It's incredibly inaccessible. Screen reader users often don't trigger the infinite scrolling, so they're stuck on a certain amount of content, and they also can pull out all the content in a page, like headings and links and things like that. And so they will, they might pull out all the headings, realize that the content that they want isn't there, and so decide that they need to look elsewhere, when in fact that content might have been there if they'd activated the infinite scrolling. So that you really can't use infinite scrolling accessibly. The next category is navigational aids. Visual indicators such as arrows, next and previous buttons have been used to indicate swipe or scroll areas or additional functionality. So here we have basically when you swipe from right to left, you move to the next tab, and there's no indication that that's what happens when you swipe. So you need to indicate that. Navigational aids such as back buttons, breadcrumbs, next and previous buttons are provided. This is the iTunes app on Android, and there's no navigational aids at all. This here shows you the lyrics, and this is like allowing you to see what songs are occurring next, and this doesn't really give you much at all. And to close it, you have to swipe down from the top to the bottom, so this fails the previous requirement as well. But basically there's no menu, there's nothing, like there's no close button, etc. Then we have the audio and video category, and in audio and video we require that everything have an accessible transcript. So this is an app called PhysiApp. It's really great. I dislocated my toes about 18 months ago in a car accident, and my physio gave me some exercises to do. There's a video here that tells you what needs to be done, and here you actually have a transcript of what the person is doing as well as what the person is saying. And the last category is forms. Field labels are positioned adjacent to their input field and appear closest to their respective input field in relation to other field labels and other input fields. So this is an example here where the radio button for yes actually is closer to the no label than it is to the yes label. And because the no radio button doesn't meet color contrast requirements, that makes it even harder to understand. And then we have mobile desktop interaction, which is applicable only to mobile sites. Item labeling between different types of a site and different variations of a responsive site is consistent. And so this is the failure that we saw before, where certain things are available on desktop that are not available on mobile app. And then the last section is test mobile assistive technology and features support. Basically, there's two requirements. All actionable items can be accessed and activated, or all important content can be accessed by the following assistive technologies or when the following feature is enabled. And these are the features that we recommend that you test. On iOS, you have VoiceOver, keyboard and switch, zoom, invert colors, grayscale, and reader view, which is a mobile site thing. And on Android, you've got talkback, keyboard and switch, magnification, invert colors, grayscale, increase text size, and simplified view. The last one being mobile site only. So I just want to show you the documentation itself. You can go to the Accessibility Oz website and under resources, there is a section called mobile testing. And here it talks about an introduction, about WCAG 2.1, mobile sites versus native apps, a little bit on hybrid apps. And then there's a section on the mobile site and a section on native apps. Each have 5 documents. There's the actual methodology itself, which just lists the methodology with no associated information. And then you have a document about mobile site testing, devices, assistive technologies, site types, variations of a page, capturing errors. With the native apps, you have something very similar as well. And then you have 3 test case documents, critical test cases, normal test cases, and test cases for assistive technologies and mobile features. So I'll just show you this one. So I just have to move it. So this is the critical test cases. So basically, you have the requirement here. Ensure there is always an accessible actionable item, e.g. a close button that meets color contrast requirements and an accessible name that closes any feature or page that overlays the current page. So then you have about this requirement. So it talks about this requirement in more detail. And then there are 6 main ways that a user can get trapped in a feature. And there's no close actionable item. The only way to close the feature is to tap outside the feature, which can be impossible for assistive technology users, such as screen reader users, keyboard users, switch users, and magnifier users. The user relies on a keyboard and the closed actionable item cannot be closed by a keyboard, etc. We even have a section about timed ads and a note about iOS testing because that can be, sometimes that can be different. And then we have a section on how to test. And this gives you detailed information on how to actually test the requirement, non-timed features versus timed features. And then we have some examples. So here we've got failure 1, no close feature. This is the daily.dot example that I showed you. Here we've got a no close feature as well. And then there's also some passes. So there's quite a few failures. And then you got passes here, accessible close feature, cancel link. In Google Maps, after the user has chosen the more link, this can be dismissed by selecting the cancel link in the pop-up. So it's quite detailed information. The assistive technology test cases have detailed instructions on how to turn them on and how to use them, and examples as well. So that's all I have to talk about today. I'd love to answer any questions that you might have.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of work by a lot of people.
Yeah, that's an amazing presentation. I think everyone on this call has just been so blown away how good you've got this together. First off, I want to also say thank you for joining us from so far away at such an early time. So
You're
really,
welcome.
really commendable there. I didn't see any questions come through, but if anyone has any, now's the time.
I should also mention that the failures are not available in those documents that are on our website because we don't really want to, annoy too many people, but they are available in OzWiki, which is our database of accessibility errors, screenshots, code, and solutions. So if you want access to that, please let us know, and just let us know that you saw this presentation, and attendees of any presentation of mine can get 3 months free access to OzWiki. I think the question for you is
Do any automated testing tools,
yeah,
do any variant testing?
Yeah, so look, we looked at the automated tools that are out there, and there really isn't anything that you can rely on at the moment. We definitely assume that's going to change. We ourselves, so it's different with mobile sites. Automated testing tools for mobile sites are pretty good, but for native apps, there isn't really anything that we really thought we could recommend at this point. The link to the wiki, the best thing to do is to email us. I'll just put the URL in it's inquiries, INQUIRIES at accessibilityoz.com. Oh, that was just sent to Jason. Let's send it to everyone. Yes, that's the best email to send it to, and just say, I went to this session and I'd like access to OzWiki.
Great. Let's see. It looks like there's a couple of questions asking about, is this going to be available as a YouTube video? Yes, if you go to Drupal GovCon, if you go to the live YouTube link that's on this particular page on the Drupal GovCon website, there's a link to the live feed there. It'll be stored there, but you'll also get a list in the GovCon YouTube account. It'll be listed there as well.
Thanks, Scott Self. I guess that's not your real name. He said, we implemented the Oz Video Player, or Oz Player, in a Gov site for accessibility, replacing embedded YouTube videos, and Gian's folks were super helpful. Thanks, Gian. You're welcome, Scott. For those people who are interested, Oz Player is our accessible video player. It's free for not-for-profits, and it's half price for government and educational institutions. So have a look on our website if you want to have a look at that. There's also on our webinar page a webinar on, you know, why video players need to be accessible and the kind of problems that you know, most video players have. And we found that really only 2 video players were accessible. One was ours, we might be biased, and the other is Able Player. So if you want a free video player, then absolutely I would recommend Able Player as being the most accessible solution.
I think it was dark when you started your presentation and the sun's coming up.
Yeah, it was dark when I drove here. Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
For fun, if you could wave a wand and fix one site app, look, I mean, I'd want to say the most popular site in the world. That's what I want to say, and I'm not sure what that is. It's probably like Amazon or something. That basically, for, like, you know, bang for your buck. That's what I want to do, is to fix the most used website. Mind you, actually, now having thought about that for a couple of seconds, I think actually maybe the most important government site, because Svetlana scrolling on Amazon makes me crazy. Yeah, it just basically, you know, if you can't access your government benefits because the website is not accessible, then that's a real problem. Probably more of a problem than not being able to buy something on Amazon. So yeah, I'd say the most popular government website.
Okay. I don't see any other questions, so unless there's any more, I think that's probably it for this session. Gian, that was an amazing talk. I think there's going to be a lot of people watching this session on YouTube, so definitely thank you, and thank you everyone for joining.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening.